Good morning, everyone. Welcome at today's discussion. My name is Lucia Jar. I am the acting editor-in-chief at the Euractiv Slovakia portal, and it is my great pleasure to moderate today's event, Turkey as EU's partner, Lessons Learned, which is currently very much based on what's going on with migration. We will talk especially about that element of migration, which has been shaping these relations since last 6 years, and we will look into what's going on today and how perhaps some kind of new approaching crisis or the ongoing crisis everywhere are going to shape the relations between Ankara and Brussels. In order to find out the most valid points, we have managed to put together really a wonderful panel of experts, which we have from not only from Bratislava, from Prague, and also from Istanbul. I will start with the gentleman, Professor Ayhan Kaya, Professor of Politics and Jean Monnet Chair of the European Politics of Interculturalism, Department of International Relations at the Istanbul Bilgi University. Welcome. Silvia Tiryaki, also a political scientist, teaching at Comenius University, BISLA, with a wide range experience, especially focusing on Turkey, and now flying between Bratislava and London. Welcome as well.
Thank you.
And Sharka Antoshova, who is migration expert from the Amnesty International at the Czech Republic. I would like to thank to you and also to all of you who are watching us either live or are logged in here at Zoom with us. Thank you very much for coming in, for being interested in the topic. And we will be very much glad if you would also become part of this discussion. We have asked you in advance to send us a couple of questions. We collected some, but if you're interested, please write into the Q&A tab. We will be receiving the questions and we will ask our dear panelists to answer. Also, if there is somebody watching at social networks, please write your comments or questions over there. We have promised that the framing word or forward will be given by Adela Jurečková, who is the director of Heinrich Böll Stiftung in Prague, who is helping us to organize this event. Unfortunately, Adela couldn't join us today, but we are sending greetings, and if she comes in later on, we will let her to speak. Anyhow, at this point, I would like to thank to Heinrich Böll Stiftung and to Europolicy for coming in together and being interested in this topic, because especially in the Central Europe, the topic of migration seems to be still very hot, even 6 years after the migration crisis itself. Yet, talking about the sources, this is kind of always put aside. So let's jump in directly into what we have ready for you. When I was preparing for the event, I was thinking that currently really the EU-Turkey agenda is kind of framed by some 3 elements. The upcoming election in Turkey, which are planned for 2023, not only parliamentary but especially presidential elections, are going to be very much in focus for everyone in the European Union and, of course, obviously in Turkey. A lot can happen in upcoming 2 years, so we have to focus on it and understand what's going on in the ground. Secondly, the state of economy in Turkey is absolutely influenced by pandemic, but also the ongoing currency and debt crisis, which is ongoing since 2018. This is very much shaping pretty much every political thought in Turkey and also every single citizen. And thirdly, and probably the most valid at this point for the European Union, is still the migration. And it's not only 4 million migrants, only, in brackets obviously, 4 million migrants that are currently residing in Turkey, making Turkey really the largest holder or host of the refugee community in the world, but more migrants are approaching Turkey. We are seeing waves from Afghanistan, and there are possibilities of extending all of that. So quite a lot, quite a big bunch of elements coming in. Especially this renewal of migration crisis is making the EU and Turkey to communicate and cooperate, or should be making them to communicate better this time, given the previous experiences. But is it really the case? So in the first round, I will ask each of our panelists to maybe frame our discussion as well, and to talk about the lessons learned from the previous crisis and how are they being incorporated into the handling of the current situation, which I have described. So let's start in Istanbul. Professor Kaya, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lucia, for invitation. And it's really great to see some of the old colleagues and to get to know you. Well, just as introductory notes, let me just say a few words about the EU-Turkey relations over the last 2 decades, which is going ups and downs. Turkey has done very well between 1999 and 2005 until the accession negotiations started. But you know, around 2005, there were important political changes in the EU, starting with the rise of Merkel, and then in those days, now many people don't remember, but we had the Sarkozy factor. So a more conservative Europe was in the making in those days, which was in a way closing the doors already for Turkey's entry. So this was a really interesting sign for the Turkish government to become more and more skeptic against the EU. And of course, in those days, political situation in Turkey was also changing drastically, especially in 2007, when the presidential office was taken by Abdullah Gül, who was one of the founders of the Justice and Development Party. Since 2007, we have witnessed a rather more Islamization of the Turkish state in particular, and neoliberalism growing, authoritarianism growing, and monopolization of the state by one single party in a way. So many other things happened in between. So what I see since 2005, 2 sides are really departing of each other to a great extent. And now we are living in an age which is characterized by right-wing populism on both sides, which is not making things any easier. But still, Turkey-EU relations are continuing, and unfortunately, nowadays, it is just mostly based on the management of mass migration flows between Turkey and Syria, and now between Turkey and Afghanistan. And EU is, in a way, treating Turkey within the framework of its externalization policy, trying to keep the refugees in Turkey without really paying enough attention to the Geneva Convention regulations, human rights violations, and to the fact that we are talking about the human beings. So this is at the moment the current state of EU relations, being just stuck in the management of migration flows between different sides.
Thank you very much for this. If you could elaborate on what you have said, you're saying that the neoliberalism and authoritarianism, it's really growing on Turkey, but European Union is not reflecting on it when handling Turkey. Really, the main point is to keep the doors closed. The migration is the only thing that we care about. How does it change the relationship between Ankara and Brussels on the political level? Is really the only discussion that is currently ongoing just considering or not considering, but it's
Yeah.
about migrants?
Yeah, Lucia, this is a very good question. I mean, according to what I see over the last few years, especially since the so-called refugee crisis 2015, according to the EU, of course, EU is, continuing the relations with Ankara, prioritizing its own interests to make sure that refugees stay in Turkey without causing a lot of trouble for the EU. And we know what it costs. It increases the right-wing populist movements in many European countries and plays in the hands of the conservative powers and rather Eurosceptic powers, etc. But on the other hand, EU has closed down its eyes not to see some political debates in Turkey with regard to the violation of human rights, with regard to the authoritarianization of the Turkish state and government. So what I see is that EU has really become, or not maybe the EU, but the individual member states in the EU have become predominantly preoccupied with their own national self-interests rather than defending the European values, defending the universal values on which the idea of Europe, the idea of EU was basically built. So what I see is that there is a more growing interest-based EU rather than a value-based EU. This is also having some other repercussions in Turkey among the Turkish public. Those pro-European parts of Turkey, parts of the Turkish population are also becoming lately rather more EU skeptic simply because they don't see an EU that is defending certain European values, even the Copenhagen values, rule of law, human rights, etc., etc. So what I see as a Jean Monnet professor of European politics, European integration, I see that EU is itself turning its back to its own values. This is a really serious matter which needs to be discussed even further within the EU circles. Thank you.
It's very interesting. Thank you very much for this, because I think it was a month ago we had the discussion on the China as authoritarian regime and its relation to the EU, and exactly the point of that the EU is kind of giving up on promoting the values. This is what's happening. This is what's destructing not only inside the EU and the population, but also giving a signal outside and distressing also people who might have been originally pro-EU, or they are turning EU skeptical. So thank you very much for mentioning this. Ms. Tiryaki, very similar question that I gave to Professor Kaya at the beginning. Which kind of elements or lessons learned do you see coming from the previous crisis, and whether we are these lessons we are incorporating them in Europe now in the current discussion with Ankara?
Thank you. Thank you, Lucia, for inviting me to this important and, in my view, necessary event. And it's never enough, right, to emphasize importance and an impact of migration, not only on human lives, but also on certain political decisions, not only in Turkey, but elsewhere. But at the same time, it's a bit sad thing that, it's almost the only thing what is left to talk about, right? And we are talking about Turkey, we are talking about a country, when it comes to EU-Turkey relations, and we are talking about the country which started its relations with European communities back in 1963, when it signed Ankara Agreement, Association Agreement, and this long, arduous journey, it has been marked by a couple of important milestones, right? It became candidate country in 1999. It started its negotiations, accession negotiations in 2005. And now in 2021, all we can talk about, though I love to talk about that, is readmission agreement. So and this state of affairs is not only to detriment of Turkey. I think that many unfortunate things could have been avoided or aborted had the events prior to what happened taken, had the events taken a different turn. But the agreement itself, it seems that it's working, at least up to a certain degree. I don't want to go too much into numbers, at least now in the introduction, but according to UNHCR portal, the arrivals to Greece dropped since the agreement was signed, right? So, I mean, from like 861,000, I mean, we came, I think in 2020 to some, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, like 16,000. I mean, of course, I mean, there were different reasons like pandemics and also closing the borders in Western Balkan countries or reinforcing borders in Western Balkan countries. But with its ups and downs, it seems that readmission agreement, up to a certain degree, at least when it comes to curbing migration towards Europe, the deal has sort of lived up to its promises. As far as I can see, this is not seen the same way, or the success of the agreement is not seen the same way from Turkish side or from Turkey, where government and the governmental officials, what they say is that they are actually part of the agreement, or parts of the agreement which haven't actually been fulfilled, or which the expectations were not met. So one of them is the money issue. We will talk about it later, I think. How much money have been spent for what types of programs. Myself, I have to admit that I'm partially, and many times I'm confused actually, what was allocated to what's supposed to be allocated to what, how it is being spent. It's not perhaps up to, I don't want to say that it's none of my business, but yeah, I don't need to know the details, but even without going too much into details, I'm not really 100% sure how much of that 6 billion has been really spent and how much was like extra allocated. So, and I'm very willing actually to learn more about it. But other parts of the agreements which haven't been fully fulfilled was the resettlement of Syrian refugees, right? The resettlement of the Syrian refugees was supposed to be done on one-to-one basis, and I think the predicted number of refugees resettled from Turkey to EU was 72,000. Now it has been more like slightly more than 28,000. Also, what we envisaged was a debate about revitalization of Turkey's EU accession process, updating the customs union, talking about visa liberation, Turkish citizens. I mean, as far as I can see, this debate about this is non-existent. So, and now with the situation in Afghanistan, I see that some in EU, they are tempted by the idea of updating the readmission agreement, or I mean, at least they're flirting with this idea, adding the Afghan component into that. Well, I mean, I acknowledge that such a regional protection strategy is important for the time being, especially from EU side. But it might be underestimating the situation on the ground. And it has been mentioned by you, and both by you and Kayhan so far, that economic crisis in Turkey is real, it is there, it is seriously serious. Whether it has been the result of mismanagement and COVID, both, it is there, right? And the Turkish population is suffering from it. Turkey has been hosting 5 million of refugees, 4 million from Syria, 1 million from elsewhere approximately. And the Syrian crisis, refugee crisis, is not over. We have Idlib. The fact that we don't talk about Idlib doesn't mean that Idlib is not there. And in Idlib, there are 4 million people ready to move if necessary, right? And these people are of various sorts. And Ayhan would know more about that doing his current research on radicalization, right? So add to that the migration from Afghanistan. I think up to the end of this year, we are expecting more than 500,000 of Afghanis actually being forced out of the country or leaving basically the country. So, and the last, not the least, but last but not least thing is that to my best knowledge, what I've been observing, Turkish population is really exhausted. It's exhausted from everything what has been going on. So, and this is, of course, this is going to have electoral implications. You were asking about the upcoming elections in Turkey, and you know how, you know, these implications are here for a Turkish leader, any Turkish leader or any Turkish leading government. So it's not only the current one, but anyone in future. 70% of overall Turkish population, according to poll data, would, and this is across entire political spectrum, would support the political party with the tough stance on borders and migration. So I'm not sure how much a gamble of updating the agreement, readmission agreement, how it would fly with any, you know, in the pre-election debate. So what to do? You know, I think that instead of relying on a country which has been saturated, fairly saturated when it comes to, you know, its willingness and hospitality, it's not because Turkey wouldn't want or out of bad will. It's basically, you know, the competition for resources and I mean, overall exhaustion of Turkish population is basically showing us that that might not be a good idea, you know, to, and also I'm not 100% sure how politically healthy the agreement is per se. So, I mean, I think that what we should talk about more is, you know, how good and up to date is EU asylum system and what to do with that in case Turkey is not willing to deliver or cannot deliver anymore. So yeah, here I would stop and I would leave the rest up in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for this. We already have Adela Jurečková, who was going to deliver an introductory word, but I will finalize this first round with Šárka Antošová to learn about her kind of ideas, what we have learned from the previous crisis and what we are, what kind of knowledge we are bringing in to the upcoming one, because Šárka has a direct experience with migrants in the field. So Šárka, the floor is yours for now.
So good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation to this interesting debate. And talking about the lessons learned, maybe at the beginning I would highlight the importance of responsibility sharing. But what we are seeing instead of responsibility sharing, it's more what was already mentioned, it's the responsibility shifting. I think it is really important to highlight again that Turkey is hosting more than 4 billion of the refugees, and 3.5 million of them are Syrian refugees. So this is showing that Turkey has demonstrated really generosity and allocated like the significant resources to host these people, and this has also the impact on the society, because the policy of the open door, which was present in Turkey in 2011, and Syrians were coming and even were welcomed. What we can see, and this is from the discussions, debates with the Turkish people, but also the experience of the Syrians, this has changed. And now people realize that these people are not going to leave the country. Probably more and more people are coming now with this situation in Afghanistan. People are really worried that Afghan people are coming as well. And with the economic crisis, with the situation like we can call it like the like economic competition and the lack of jobs, housing, and other important items, it's really becoming worse and worse, I would say. It's not only Turkey. We are observing the situation also, for example, in Greece, where the situation has changed considerably during the last years as well. I would like to talk now just briefly at the beginning from the human rights perspective. This EU-Turkey deal from 2016, it's really problematic from the human rights perspective, and it resulted in overcrowded refugee camps in Greece, really inhuman conditions, which we were not able to imagine a few years ago in Europe of the 21st century. Also, two other problematic issues I would like to mention. One of them are pushbacks from like illegal collective returns of people, asylum seekers from Greece to Turkey, which are happening more and more and are becoming more and more violent. And according to our last report from this spring, also the violence is present more and more. Even children and women are pushed back, families, even asylum seekers with the applications, asylum within the asylum procedures. That's really something very problematic and illegal. And also the situation in Turkey, Amnesty has been documenting and reporting deportations of Syrians since 2014 back to Syria. And this is also happening with the Afghanis people, which is of course again illegal. And this is like something which is coming resulting of the situation and the big, I'm sorry to call it like this, but the burden which the massive income of the people is causing in the countries. And of course, it has this impact as well. So this is from the human rights perspective, just briefly, and we can talk about it more if people will be interested.
Absolutely. I will definitely get back to the conditions and livings of migrants, especially in Turkey, and also in some kind of a mirror of what was recently published by the European Commission as their yearly report on Turkey, because they really paid attention to migration, and some very interesting things came out of it. But before I get back to this, let me welcome once again Adela Jurečková, who is director of Heinrich Böll Stiftung office in Prague, who is also dedicated to Slovakia and Bratislava. Adela, I'm not going to give you floor for the introductory remarks, but I would be very much interested on how you are seeing the current discussion from, again, from the point of view of human rights, but also political, where from maybe point of view of Heinrich Böll Stiftung, we are currently in those. And maybe you can give also the perspective on some kind of connection to the Central Europe, which we are trying to make here as well.
Hey, good morning. I'm sorry that I missed the beginning. So let me give at least a few introductory remarks and welcome you all on behalf of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, the German Green think tank and partner of this event, on today's debate. We have already got a lot of insight on the topic by our invited experts. So yeah, I will skip the introductory remarks into the topic, but I would just like to stress that in spite of the 5 years which have passed since the start of the so-called refugee crisis, Europe was still not able to agree on a common asylum reform to regulate migration on a permanent and sustainable basis. And that all draft reforms failed mainly due to the question of redistribution of arriving refugees between the states, where especially the Visegrad 4 are resisting the admission of asylum seekers until today. The victims, as Sharka already stressed, are the refugees on the Greek islands themselves, and they are still living in inhumane conditions in the camps there. Also, talking about the situation on the European level, as Greece reacted in March 2020 to the rupture between EU and Turkey by a rigorous border closure and suspended the right to apply for asylum for a month, instead of calling this a legal violation by name, EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen praised Greece actually as Europe's protective shield. And since Turkey no longer takes back rejected asylum seekers, reports of illegal pushbacks in which refugees are denied the right to asylum proceedings have been increasing in the Mediterranean. The EU is still sticking to the agreement because it benefits from it. But as the escalation between EU and Turkey in spring 2020 showed, the EU is paying a political price for the agreement and is giving the Turkish president a great deal of leverage. We already, the situation with Afghanistan has been mentioned. And this already difficult situation becomes even more explosive thanks to it. Nevertheless, the EU has been negotiating with Turkey since the beginning of the year about the extension of the refugee agreement. Most recently, Chancellor Angela Merkel advocated this during her visit to Turkey in October. So I would say Europe and Turkey are at a crossroads when it comes to responsibility for the care and redistribution of refugees. And much is at stake: the future of hundreds of thousands of refugees and migrants, the unity of Europe, and also its relations with the important Aegean neighbor, Turkey. If the EU member states should reach an agreement with Turkey, the question is, what should it look like? And how could it also include refugees who do not come from Syria? Because actually it's only linked to Syrians. Could the EU move Erdogan to a new agreement if it accepts Ankara's wishes, for example, a liberal issuing of visas or a customs union? And would such an agreement even survive a new gas dispute in the Mediterranean, for example? And very important question is also, what would a solution look like that could end the human misery in the EU hotspots? And of course, last but not least, how can the Visegrad states such as Slovakia contribute to such a future-proof and sustainable solution? So there are still no specific answers to these important questions, but however, I hope that today's debate will at least bring us closer to possible answers. And that's why I would like to make the point here and thank Europolicy for the initiative for this event and wish you all a fruitful and enriching debate.
Thank you, Adela, and thank you for not only framing it, but also giving us some suggestions for the questions, because these are really big questions, which I'm sure that many thinkers in Turkey, in Europe, and in many other parts of the world are discussing. You have obviously framed the discussion around the migration. So let's go back to Sharka, because Sharka, you have explained how, for instance, Amnesty International is seeing the connection of development of the situation in relations to the human rights. But asking directly on your expertise or the expertise from the Amnesty International, could you describe a little bit how the situation of migrants in Turkey is currently looking? Because we said that many came 5 years ago, 6 years ago, many are already settled, many are kind of incorporated into the society, but many are still living aside. Many are thinking to continue their route, and the new migrants are coming as well. So all that mixture, how does it look in the field?
Okay, so I can talk according to my knowledge and my experience, but of course this is not describing the whole picture and the situation of all the people. And I would say that it's diverse. There are people who are living quite, let's say, successfully, people who are able to open their businesses and who are able to have a decent life. And then on the other side, there are, of course, people who are let's say, living in the street and asking for money because they really have nothing to live from. And then between these two extremes, let's say, there is a big variety of people. I think I can just generally describe what are the problems that people are facing, and maybe the other colleagues can then complete their perspective or their experience. This is it's the access to the housing, to the education, in many cases to the healthcare. What was the problem of many people was also because when they left Syria, they had savings, they had money, but this has changed during the years, of course, because also Syrians, most of them we were talking with, they didn't expect that they are going to stay in Turkey for longer. They thought they just go to the safety, and then when the situation gets better in Syria, they will come back. Unfortunately, the situation has not improved enough to go back. It is dangerous to go back to Syria, to return, and it doesn't look like that it would change anytime soon. Other things that I could maybe mention, and they are quite important to talk about, is also exploitation. Many people, because they have difficulties to enter the legal labor market, so they are working for really not much money without the contracts and exploited. Unfortunately, the situation also happens in some situation with the children. There are children who are abused in different ways without the protection. That's one of the big problems. Access to the education I've already mentioned. And there was anything else I wanted to say. No, now I forgot, so I'm sorry, but I will remember later. And then I think what we could also mention is this anti-migrants animosity. I would say, for example, there was one important case in August, I think, this year, I think it was when one Turkish teenager was killed during a fight with the Syrian guys. And this resulted into violence against Syrians in general, against their businesses, houses, and the fear. And again, people are asked to go home. They are said that they are not welcome in Turkey. And as I mentioned already before, the current economical crisis, the problems, anxiety about the future, economic future, jobs, housing. So all this is making a mixture which is not the best situation. And now with the situation in Afghanistan, the tension is rising for sure. And also the upcoming elections, according to my information, the opposition parties, both the most important, they are already talking about their intention to make possible for Syrians to go back to Syria, to return them. So I think.
Yes. Let's stay. You are talking about the animosity that is growing among the population. We will get to it in a while, but let's stick to the migration, to the migrants that are living either from Syria, from Afghanistan, a lot from Somalia, for instance, in Turkey. You have mentioned that many kids are having troubles in getting into system. The recent European Commission report says that almost 770,000 kids of a school age are enrolled at the school system, but still 400,000 is out of the system. So this is where we see the disproportion. You were also mentioned the healthcare. For instance, European Union is financing very much the kind of this benefit of free of charge healthcare, which is provided in health migration health centers around the country, also by the state money, but also by the European money. This is through the facility for refugees in Turkey, very much financed by the European Commission or European Union. So there are incentives coming from the Europe. There are incentives that Turkey is offering, and maybe Professor Kaya can kind of divided. Do we know, or is it anyhow clear from the outside to understand what is really the cost? Now let's talk, get away a little bit from the human rights, although keeping in mind, obviously, but what is being paid, or what is the European Union taking care of when it comes to migrants in Turkey, and what really the government is providing?
Thank you, Lucia. Let me just first say that for our audience, we use the term refugees. I use the term refugees for the Syrians in Turkey, but they are not refugees. Turkey is implementing temporary protection regulation since 2014. And it is actually a kind of replicate of what the EU member states did in the late 1990s to accommodate Bosnian refugees, again, under temporary protection in especially Germany and Sweden. And let me also remind you that even before the security was secured in Bosnia-Herzegovina, hundreds, thousands of refugees, Bosnian refugees, were forced to leave Germany in those days. So this is a really interesting, actually, debate that I try to follow because we see a very similar trend in Turkey. The Turkish Ministry of Interior, from time to time, using this return discourse very strongly to encourage many Syrians to return to their country of origin, Syria. Of course, they argue that they are securing the well-being of people if they return and everything. But we know that from the field, Syrians who are still seeing Assad regime as a threat are not willing to return as long as Assad regime is there. So this was just a footnote for the audience to understand a bit the details a bit better. And your question, yes, and Sharka has also explained that very well. In the beginning of the mass migration movement, the Turkish government and state used a rather more religious rhetoric, which is called Ansar, taking us back to the time of Muhammad, when he, with his entourage, had to migrate from Mecca to Medina to join the other newly Islamized people, Muslim people. So the locals in Medina, the local Muslims in Medina, helped Muhammad and his entourage coming from Mecca. This was the same rhetoric revitalized here in Turkey by the Justice and Development Party, which is a more conservative and Islamist party, as we all know. And this actually worked out pretty well. So, I mean, I criticize this, many people criticize this, but when you look at the outcome, it has become a very successful way of accommodating the Syrian Muslims, who are mostly Sunni Muslims, Arabs. But of course, it didn't work, the same didn't work out for, let's say, Christian origin migrants, Christian origin Syrians, Yazidis, coming from Syria. So there is this religious element very obviously standing there, something that we also observe in the Central European countries, especially in Hungary. Remember the rhetoric of Orban and the state actors saying that we will only accept refugees if they are Christians. So defending the Christian values of the European Union in different countries in Central and East Europe. So religion plays a great role in today's world, and unfortunately we are getting away from this secular rhetoric based on liberal human rights, etc., etc. So we see exactly the same in Turkey. But this has resulted in lately some negative externalities. because Ansar rhetoric and guesthood rhetoric is, is strengthening the temporality of migrants in the minds of the locals. So because of this guesthood rhetoric, because of this Ansar rhetoric, because of this temporality rhetoric, local Turks always believed, always assumed that, well, these people are going to go back at some point. But 10 years passed. So because of this, rhetoric, discourse, Turks are becoming now impatient. And we see in different localities, Sharka talked, one of the examples was lately in Ankara, in one of the banlieues of Ankara. I know that there were many others in the past, because these incidences, lynching attempts, did not appear in the mainstream media, because mainstream media is mainly organized or controlled by the Justice and Development Party, Erdogan's party. But if you follow the things as a scholar, if you follow the local media, you will see a lot of places, a lot of problems, a lot of lynching attempts, a lot of hostilities and racism, growing Arabophobia, like Islamophobia in Europe. We have an emerging Arabophobia here, not only against the Syrians, but also against all kinds of people coming from, Gulf countries. So what is happening now in Turkey is that this is kind of hijacked. This anti-migrant, anti-refugee sentiments are now being instrumentalized by some political figures who are standing at the far right of the political spectrum. They are instrumentalizing this discourse in order to recruit, vote. And now Turkey is really getting into this electoral cycle again. And I think we will even see more incidences as such, incidences of hostility, racism, discrimination against the Syrians, as well as the Afghans and other refugees and migrants, growing even more, like what we see in different European cities. So, and one final thing about this whole debate of hostility, this is also very interesting. Now, so many different oppositional parties are trying to, scapegoat the Syrians for the ills of the Turkish politics, Turkish economy, Turkish democracy, peace and prosperity, etc. And then, as a response, the government, the leading leading power, is using a very interesting discourse. This is really shocking for me, because they were the ones using Ansar spirit, this religious rhetoric, to welcome the Muslim brothers and sisters. And now this rhetoric is no longer there. Instead, this rhetoric has been replaced what I call Simsar rhetoric. Simsar is like, you see these people as cheap labor contributing to the Turkish economy, and the government officers are saying that, what if we send these people back to Syria simply because you guys want, but in that case, our economy will collapse. So this shift is a really interesting shift. And I see that on the one hand, some of the oppositional parties are instrumentalizing hostility against the refugees for their own political interests. But Justice and Development Party is doing something similar for their own economic interests. So this is really economic and political interests. As far as I can see, the refugees are stuck between these economic and political interests of different political parties.
Thank you very much for making this point. I think it's absolutely correct that we are seeing that there is seriously not a strong force that would be on the side of migrants in Turkey. No matter who is going to win the election in 2 years, it seems that this entity, either it's going to be the same government or a different, is going to continue instrumentalizing migration as a political tool, and not only inside within the Turkey, but also against the EU, because this is a strong rhetoric that seems to be absolutely working.
Yeah, the leverage, the leverage
Exactly.
will remain there for some more time, but it's not really functioning as it used to, I should say, because the government is losing its credibility in the EU. The leaders are losing their credibility in the EU. So I don't think that refugees will remain as a strong leverage for the Turkish policymakers in the mid-run.
So it's kind of lose-lose for everyone. At the
Yeah,
end.
kind of. I mean, these people are, living under hunger threshold. I'm not saying poverty threshold. I mean, majority of the Syrians, especially in Turkey, are living under hunger threshold, thanks to the money that they received from the, ESSN program of the European Union. And on the other hand, of course, we need to acknowledge some of the very positive developments about the integration of the Syrians under temporary protection. We are a member of the MIPEX group of countries run by, an institution in Brussels, and we follow, the integration facilities of the Turkish state and society, and we could see that Turkey has done pretty well, much better than many EU member states, in terms of integrating refugees to educational institutions, to health services, and to also naturalization processes. So, in these three layers of integration, Turkey has done extremely well over the last 5 years, but still Turkey is suffering a lot in terms of integrating refugees to formal labor market. But the refugees know that if they get the work permit, they know that they will lose the financial assistance coming from the EU. So this is the condition. So EU and Turkey should work harder to finance these people, even if they are formally recruited in the labor market. So I think there will be some changes soon between the EU and Turkey, because Turkish state also wants to formalize the Syrians and the other refugees in the labor market. There is a willingness of the state in that regard.
Absolutely. And talking about the EU side, I have mentioned that last week we have received, or we have all seen the European Commission's yearly report. They are actually saying that Turkey made some progress on migration and asylum policy. So what you, Professor, are mentioning, but they are particularly saying that, or praising the part that Turkey strengthened the surveillance and protection capacity of the eastern land border. We know that the gates and the fences are being also built over there. So again,
Turkey, this is also Europeanization of migration and asylum policies. This is what we call in the literature securitization of migration and asylum. So Turkey is in that sense very well being Europeanized, I should say.
Yes, and from the point of view of the EU, and also including the perspective of human rights, I mean, this is what the Europe or Brussels is praising over there. that's quite strange, but we have also started to talk about the budget. You, Ms. Tiriaki, mentioned that we don't really know where the money are being distributed exactly.
I don't really know.
Or, actually, I don't think that anyone really knows, because there are obviously numbers. The operational budget, for instance, of the facility for refugees that I mentioned, that is mostly dealing with the migrants in Turkey. It's financed by the EU. It's the yearly budget is 6 or full operational budget.
Full operation was 6 billion.
Full, full operation.
I mean, let me just say one thing
yes.
about this. Since 2016, most of 6 billion euro were spent under the strict surveillance of the EU Commission, European Commission. But this was also criticized by the Turkish, authorities, state actors, local actors, as well as the NGOs. And now there is the New Deal, and according to the New Deal, EU will be more, open to let the local authorities, especially municipalities, use the funds as they, want to. And I think this is really an important move on the part of reform on the part of the European Union, because I know very well, working with the local municipalities since 2016, EU-Turkey refugee deal. Local municipalities are even more active to integrate, to accommodate refugees. So integration is a local phenomena. So if we know that it's a local phenomena, we need to empower the local municipalities to accommodate these people through their own terms. And I'm very happy to hear lately that Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality has signed a deal with the UNHCR, a protocol with the UNHCR, to work together for the integration of refugees. And Istanbul is, I don't know how many millions of refugees and migrants are in Istanbul. It's a 16 million, 17 million city, and there are more than 1 million refugee and migrant origin people here. And if Istanbul is doing this, that means that majority of the problem is due to be solved anyway.
And we are mentioning this EU-Turkey statement or a deal that kind of been suspended from the Turkish side in March last year. That's very interesting episode, because according to that deal, the exchange of migrants were ongoing since last year, since 1.5 years. This is not working anymore. Turkey is requiring some changes within that deal. So, Ms. Tiriaki, what changes is Turkey looking for? What kind of changes overall we should incorporate in it? Professor Kaya and also Ms. Antoshova already mentioned a couple of elements, but how this whole deal should transform from your point of view in order to really fulfill the shortcomings that we are seeing literally for years now.
Thank you. I just mentioned in the introduction that I was not sure how politically healthy the whole deal was actually, and update, including more refugees. We can talk about it a bit later, but you mentioned very interesting thing that Europeanization is sort of raising fences, That's something what I would have never thought of, at least some years ago. But Lucia actually pointed out righteously that was the part that's an interesting part of the report. Ayhan mentioned Ansar, which is very interesting. It has been instrumentalized in Turkish political discourse, but maybe unwillingly and unknowingly, it is also part of European political discourse when it comes to the readmission agreement. So what I'm hearing a lot is like, Turkey can deal much better than the refugees than us, because the refugees, or in case of Turkey, guests, they are predominantly Muslims, and Turkey is a predominantly Muslim country. So what's the problem? Where is this animosity coming from? So funnily enough, Ansar, is used also in European discourse without knowing that it's Ansar, by itself. So the animosity is perhaps also, and as I said, like I don't think it's a bad will or something on the parts of the Turkish population which is done in a bad way. But still, the population, religion is not the only thing, right? They are majority of those people are linguistically, ethnically, many times culturally different to the local population, and if you and then there is a necessary fight or necessary competition for the resources, as I mentioned. So if you take an example of, for instance, province of Kilis, what's the population of Kilis? 140,000 people, and they are hosting like more than 100,000 of Syrian refugees. So the local population, the number of the local population equals to the number of refugees. I come back to Lucia's original question about what should be part of the deal. Also, the local municipalities' empowerment is sine qua non of the future success, right? I mean, that's the distribution of money has to go from the somehow from the bottom to the top. Knowing or thinking that those people would go away, it's not necessarily a bad thing in my view. I used to work with Syrian refugee women 5 years ago, back in Istanbul, 6 years ago, in the beginning of the refugee crisis. And the interviews we conducted, we did also a quantitative research, qualitative research, but the quantitative research showed us that majority of them, okay, I mean, that was 5 years ago, and I don't think it changed much. Even though some times has passed since then. Majority of them, more than 75% of those Syrian women, they would go back to Syria. I think it was even more than 80%, would go back to Syria if it were safe for them. But there might be safe places, there might not be safe places. We know how it is with returning Syrian refugees. We might not even hear about them anymore after they return to the country. So, so it's not only about securitization of Turkey, building defenses, and but it's also about Syria. We stopped talking about solving the conflict in a just, viable, and feasible way. We somehow pretend that it has been solved because, regime is having control of a majority of the territory. But I'm very much worried about another wave of refugees. I mentioned Idlib. It might be from elsewhere, and Syrians themselves are not willing to go back now, just because of the security situation in the country, not because they are, I don't know. I mean, they don't feel welcomed or good enough in Turkey. As Ayhan said, they are living under not the poverty line, but below the hunger line. So. The competition for resources is real there. The rental prices are going up. Labor prices are going down. On purpose, I'm mentioning labor prices, not wages, because of the non-existence of the contracts, right? In many cases. So I think what Sharka mentioned. It's a must. It's a must to start thinking in terms of responsibility of sharing instead of responsibility of shifting. Responsibility of shifting would lead us only to further and future problems. It will just accumulate, and we will have to solve it at some point, but it might be too late.
But this instrumentalization of migration and also securitization that we are discussing is very much mirrored in Europe, especially in Central Europe. We are seeing, or wherever I go and wherever I am talking with almost anyone in Turkey regarding Turkey, people will always tell me, yes, but Turkey is going to open the borders, and what are we going to do? That this is the main rhetoric since 6, maybe even 7 years. So Europe is still fearing this. But Ms. Tiryaki, do you think that really is there a possibility that the borders to the west might be open from Turkish side, that it would really happen? We've seen it last year. It was the beginning of COVID. It was kind of a unfortunate or fortunate situation because the borders open. The Greek part was very strongly protecting it, but at the same time, there were not that many people, even taken by buses from different parts of the world. There were not that many people who were willing to kind of cross borders. So it kind of played very bizarre at the end, including how the pandemic was spreading. So should we still be fearing that Turkey is going to open borders?
Well, I mean, given the events which happened a couple of days ago, I think that there are many things possible in Turkey, right? I mean, we cannot exclude actually. Well, I mean, let's see. I mean, I wouldn't say that that cannot happen. Turkey proved its capacity to instrumentalize this, to simply play it in a certain way. But I think that the particular incident was like something sort of like winning a fight and losing the whole battle.
Could you explain the incident a little bit so that the participants also?
Well, I mean, it was not really an incident. It was intentional opening of the borders and letting actually those refugees or guests from Turkey cross across the Greek border to Europe. You know, I mean, in numbers, it might not have been too much, but in terms of PR, it played. Yeah, it was an immense event. I think again, like the whole thing is wrong. You know, the whole thing from the beginning is wrong. That we are fearing, and your question actually is about: shall we fear that Turkey would open the borders again? It's like, you know, we created this storage place for refugees in Turkey till we figure out what to do.
And we are not figuring it out at
and
all.
We are not figuring it out. And now it's boiling, it's saturated. It's actually, as I mentioned, I mean, the hospitality of Turkish people ran out, I mean, the patients as well. Because, you know, we always talk about like, can we have this deal with Erdogan? Can Ankara do this? Can, you know, how much money that would cost? And what about people, you know, where are these? I mean, then we talk about the municipalities and how they are going to deal with this. At the end of the day, it's about the local population and their daily lives. So the fact that we created this storage from Turkey, and Turkey actually, or Turkish government actually let us do that, doesn't mean that the whole situation had been rectified, right? The problem is, in this particular case in Syria, we should focus on Syria and on the conflict of Syria and in Syria and see how the situation is there. And then we might not be actually bothered by the fact whether Turkish government or whoever is in power is gonna open the taps, as we call it popularly, right? And you know, and let the migrants flow towards Europe. So I mean, let's be serious. And everyone knows where the problem is. So why are we fooling ourselves? You know, why are we blurring the lines and the realities and the importance of the real issues?
And Bircan Çiğtak, and please take anyone who wants this floor. Bircan Çiğtak, one of our participants, is asking that how long such deal can be justified in Europe. He's writing, according to the EU, Turkey does not meet the Copenhagen criteria. How can such a refugee agreement be legitimized, considering that refugees are entitled to protection, while on one side the lack of rights explain the stop of negotiations, but on the other side, how can this deal be justified? And my question also is, for how long can we be playing three monkeys over here?
Well, I mean,
or anyone?
Yes.
Well, please.
Can I mean, you know, to add something to what Silvia said about the incidents of opening the borders in late February 2020 and early March 2020, we should not forget about the fact that you know, migrants, refugees were used as a leverage by the Turkish state in those days to make sure that the EU would side, Turkey in negotiations against the Russian forces and the regime forces in Syria. Let's not forget that just prior to that opening up, or what triggered Turks to open up the border to use migrants as a leverage was because of the killing of 34 Turkish soldiers in Idlib, in the north-west borders of Syria. So in those days, Turkish state officers thought that they did not have the backup of the EU. And then after the incidents of opening the borders, I think the EU responded positively, and then the talks between Turkey and the EU started again to make sure that EU would side with Turkey in these negotiations of proxy wars. I don't know, whatever you call, IR people would know that better. So the context was very decisive in those days, but it doesn't mean that something similar will not, take place. It all depends on the context. But I don't think that out of the blue, Turkish state officers can do something very similar. It requires the right context, to make sure that Turkey still has the bargaining power, instrumentalizing the refugees to gain something in the short run or in the long run in diplomacy, so to speak.
Sharka, we were also mentioning Afghani refugees that are coming to Turkey. What is the situation now, or how is it different now with Syrians? We've already mentioned that at the beginning, when Syrians started to come to Turkey, the idea was, yes, they are our brothers, let's accommodate them. Now the rhetoric's changed, and we see thousands of Afghanis coming, also from the border from Iran. And probably this might be growing, these numbers. Sylvia already explained as well. How are the migrants different from those previous one? And how is this possibly going to influence the negotiations with Brussels or between Brussels and Ankara?
I am afraid to say that the situation is completely different from 2011, because as we mentioned, it was a really open door policy defended by Erdogan. Now Erdogan's government sent already soldiers to the border to help to stop Afghans to come. They are speeding up to the construction of a wall on the border, and the people, Turkish people, they are really worried and afraid, and they don't want newcomers, new refugees, new asylum seekers coming to Turkey. This is quite clear. According to some debates I even had with the Turkish people, they told me we hardly got used that the Syrians are probably staying and taking our jobs, our opportunities, and now you want us to receive other people coming. This is impossible in this situation. People are really openly against this. So I think the situation is completely different.
And do you, yeah?
Yeah, it's also the thing with Afghani refugees in Turkey is that, Turkey has been for a long time a typical host and transit country for irregular migration from Afghanistan to Europe. Yeah, it has been there for decades. And there have been families, Afghani families, many Afghani families, literally from all social backgrounds living in Turkey for a very long time. But so one might presume that, okay, the Turkish population might have got used to Afghani migrants, and but as Sharka said, I agree with her that this time the wave of migration, or this wave is completely different, and it's not only because of its size. There are also security elements involved in that. There is a substantial fear of jihadists and other radical networks actually being organized within Turkey, and this shouldn't be underestimated. So, and this is, of course, I mean, this is, it's somehow modifying or influencing both national but also regional politics. It depends on, you know, what kind of or what part of Turkey we are talking about. But I think that there is no region or no province in Turkey that would be actually sort of like you know, free of this fear.
Mm-hmm. Professor Kaya wanted to add something?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I agree with the fact that the situation is very different at the moment. But we also have to acknowledge the fact that Afghan migration to Turkey has been there for at least 3 decades or even earlier, since especially the 1990s. And the reason why it has become so spectacular at the moment is partly because of the Taliban, you know, taking over since August this year. And the other reason is that some of the right-wing, you know, far right-wing political figures have been instrumentalizing this new, you know, refugees coming from Afghanistan through the social media. They have posted even many images which are not, you know, new, which are rather old images of like 2 or 3 years ago. I can give you some numbers. For instance, in 2019, there were, according to the official figures, there were 200,000 Afghanis who were detained. 200,000 Afghanis who were detained. In 2020, because of the pandemic, because of other reasons, because of what Sylvia said, you know, security forces empowered in the region to protect the border, this went down to 50,000. And 2021, the number of Afghanis who were detained is like less than 40,000. So, you know, there is not, you know, a massive Afghani migration, which is, you know, not really atypical, you know, according to the previous year's numbers, because most of the Afghanis are, you know, going to Pakistan, you know, more than 1.5 million go to Pakistan to use Pakistan as a refuge, and more than 800,000 go to Iran, next door neighbor. Those who come to Turkey are mostly young people who were trying to go to Europe. Yes. And remember, in 2015, during the crisis in the Greek islands, the majority of the migrants in the Greek islands were coming from Afghanistan, not from Syria or elsewhere. So this has been an ongoing issue, and I don't think really that we have seen yet a very different picture in terms of the Afghanis, you know, state of Afghanis in Turkey in comparison to what happened 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And the total number of Afghanis at the moment in Turkey is around like, I think, 200,000 Afghani origin people residing, you know, and around like 54,000 of them have residence permit, and around like 23,000 of them have international protection. And so that means that around like more than 100,000 of Afghanis are illegal, trying to survive in the agricultural sector, working as shepherds, collecting, you know, recycled material on the streets, and working in the construction sector. This is exactly what the Justice and Development Party people are talking about, you know, contributing to the Turkish economy through informal ways. Of course, this is not something really acceptable. Thank you.
or praisable. Thank
Yeah.
you. Yes, we have only 10 minutes left, so I will try to kind of incorporate also the questions that we received from our audience, and kind of wrap it up at the same time. Let's kind of look into the future of what is upcoming. We were saying that there are discussions on somewhat an elaboration or changes in the current agreement between Brussels and Ankara. So, Sharka, from the point of view, from the human rights point of view, we know Turkey is coming into very politically sensitive period, and upcoming elections are going to, I will say, mess up a lot of things. The instrumentalization of the migration will definitely be an element when it comes to satisfying the locals, but also playing a strong card against the West and the European Union. So again, from the point of view of achieving the highest protection possible of human rights of migrants, because we said this is really, we shouldn't be avoiding this topic, this is the main topic. What can Brussels do? I know it's a tricky one, in order to make it work anyhow better this time.
Okay, let's talk theoretically. What would help? For sure, if countries provide much considerably more resettlement places for the vulnerable asylum seekers from Turkey. This is the first thing that first of all would help to the most vulnerable people. Second of all, it will be a signal to Turkey that we don't leave them alone with this large refugee population. But this, of course, needs the willingness of the EU member states. And again, after 2015, 16, 17, the countries who were willing to take refugees, they already did it. And they usually don't want to take much more. And the countries who were not willing to take refugees, to receive refugees, asylum seekers, they are against that.
Yes, refusing it still.
This is the first thing. And then what also the High Commissioner of United Nations, when he recently visited Turkey, mentioned, he urged member states and not only European states, but the global community to help Turkey, to support it, and also the financial support, of course, it's important. Again, it is also important to know where the money go, because we are, okay, this I won't comment, but of course it's important because there are projects which really help to the refugees. There are also really successful, nice projects financed by from the European money. So this is of course important, but that money is not all. They really need, and this applies for all of the countries who are facing a lot of people coming. They need somebody else to take the people, at least the most vulnerable ones, because this, as I mentioned, it helps to the people, but it helps to the country as well, because it's really difficult to handle a big amount of the people for a long time.
So the solidarity is really a major element, as you
and yeah, solidarity, yeah. And again, responsibility sharing, not shifting, because we think, and maybe here I would mention one more thing. This is not only Turkey. This is the same situation which is happening with Libya, with the deal we have with Libya, and we are closing the eyes. We pretend not to see what is happening with the migrants who are returned back to Libya, tortured, detained, raped, and so on. But Brussels sees this as success, because there is a really considerable big drop
I'm not sure if you can Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes,
we
I
can.
lost all of you, but yeah, okay, I'm back. Thank you, Sharka. I didn't hear the last part of what you were saying, so if you can just
Yeah, I don't know what you heard, but I was just mentioning this the similar situation in Libya, where
Libya,
it is
yes.
even more serious because people are arrested, trying to cross the Mediterranean and then return to the detention centers where they are tortured. We know it, but we see it as a success because the number of people coming to Europe has been reduced a lot. But
Yeah.
this is not the solution. No, this is not the solution we would like to see in Europe of the 21st century, I hope.
Yes, exactly. So the numbers are going down, but at the same time, we're closing eyes. Professor Kaya, from the perspective of Turkey, where do you think that Turkey will? I hope you heard me. I don't know.
Not really, Lucia. There was interruption, so I really didn't get the question very well.
I'm sorry. So once again, hopefully this will work.
Okay.
My question was how the Turkey will be playing it in upcoming 2 years. I mentioned the opposition. The human rights is not really the strong element over there. Same thing with the population and the government. Current government we've already seen. So how the things from the perspective of Ankara will be evolving in your opinion?
Yes, well, my suggestion will go not only to Turkey, but also to the EU, member states and the European Commission, because I think the main question that the leading political figures, state actors, EU Commission, etc., etc., the main question for them is this rise of right-wing populist Eurosceptic forces, and in Turkey as well, right-wing populist movements, political parties instrumentalizing refugees, migrants, scapegoating them. But we all know that the problems that we are facing is not because of the migrants, is not because of the refugees. The problems that we are facing at the moment, both in Turkey and the EU, are socioeconomic problems, socioeconomic deprivation, spatial deprivation. I mean, I can tell you, majority of the right-wing populist party supporters are coming from remote places in the EU, which were previously agricultural production sites, mountainous places, and the people here in those places believe that they are being neglected over the last 3 decades by the mainstream political parties, by Brussels, by Berlin, by Amsterdam, by Paris, etc. So there is a kind of resentment among these people at the verge of the political of the nation states to express themselves. But unfortunately, what I see is that there is no one in the center to listen. This is the problem of the mainstream political parties. They don't listen. They're just too cosmopolitan, too globalist, too international capitalists. But people are there trying to tell you something, but you don't really. And then you start using this migrant phobic or refugee skeptic discourse with the expectation that you will kind of combat against the right-wing, radicalism or populism, etc., etc. For the Turkish side, well, I'm rather, not that, pessimistic about the future of the accommodation of the refugees and migrants in Turkey, because Turkey has always been exposed to mass migrations. It's not new. In 1990s, hundreds, thousands of Bosnians and Kosovars. Before that, hundreds, thousands of Kurds from the Gulf region. 19th century, 20th century. So Turkey has this very strong habitus. And the main thing for me is that if the local municipalities are going to be involved in this process, and I see that they are willing because according to the municipal law of Turkey, there is the Article 13, which is called fellowship principle, which tells us that the local municipalities are obliged to give the same quality of services to the citizens as well as to everyone living in that territory. So Turkey has this, legal system as well. But the biggest problem that Turkey is facing at the moment in terms of accommodation, local accommodation of refugees and migrants, is that there is not financial support coming from the central budget. So this is the problem, and the municipalities are suffering from the lack of financial support coming from the central state.
So knowing all of these issues, Dr. Teriaki, when we go to Brussels, and again, I will frame it a little bit wider, incorporating the questions that we get. We are seeing that there were elections, for instance, in Germany. This may be having some influence on the policies that we will have also towards Turkey. We are seeing upcoming elections in France, but from the Central Europe in Hungary, which is going to be very strong voice to kind of push back migrants again or continuously. So what can Brussels do in order to help or raise the quality of life of migrants in Turkey, help them to incorporate them in Brussels? Are there, we talked about the municipalities activities that can be enhanced. Do you see any other ways or attributions that could happen?
The long term of Brussels is that there has been always an election, right? So,
too many countries, many elections.
For now, we are dealing with migration problems. Then before that, we had different problems. There was always an election coming, election, and so on. So we have to somehow, I mean, we are not politicians, so we have to somehow think beyond elections. And those who are supposed to be apolitical in Brussels should think beyond elections as well, I believe. Above all, it's totally morally and legally and otherwise wrong to even contemplate that using migrants for any kind of agenda by anyone is anything acceptable, right? I mean, we talk about it as if it's a norm.
It totally became
morally and legally definitely not acceptable. Yeah. Of course, this has very little to do with political realities. We know, all of us know this very, very well. But I would say that with or without migration deal or readmission agreement, what we have to do in European Union, or what's supposed to be done, is to look into asylum laws. That's what I mentioned in the beginning. The things will be happening, anything can happen. I mean, I think that the predictions in general, and I think political scientists would agree with me, became much more difficult in the last couple of years than they used to be even a decade ago. So I think that a proper discussion, proper look into existing asylum system in European Union is something which must be done with or without the agreement with Turkey.
Mm-hmm. But the countries, including Slovakia and Central European countries, are going to insist on having further agreements like we have with Ankara. So the discussion may get again.
You're saying good luck with this, right?
Yeah. I don't mean to. I don't mean to be bad.
No,
it seems like a challenging time ahead. So just to wrap it up very politically. Thank you very much, all of you. Professor Ayhan Kaya from Istanbul Bilgi University, Dr. Silvia Teriaki from Wisla and Comenius University, and Sharka Antashova of Amnesty International Czech Republic. Thank you also Adela Jurečková from Heinrich Böll Foundation for coming in, putting this discussion together. I would absolutely stay much longer because I think there are plenty of things that I kind of had in mind to discuss with you, but we couldn't get to it because it's such a wide topic, and until we pass through all political, economic, and social elements of that ongoing crisis, which may be even developing further, we would need hours, and it's still very difficult to find solutions. But all of you seem to be quite optimistic and gave us also some ideas of what is possible to do. So let's hope and stay. Let's hope for the best and stay positive on this. Thank you very much for your contributions. Thank you very much to our audience, people that are watching us on social networks, and the future audience that will be listening us at podcasts. We're looking forward to write and organize more events on this topic. Thank you to Hannibal Stiftung, Europolicy, and Euractiv for organizing. Have a good lunch, have a good day, and I hope to see you soon in person, all of you. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.